Oh my God. Pastor Hagee and then Malcolm Hoenlein. So if this is what CUFI does to its friends, I shudder to think what they do to their enemies. Also, it was a movie. Remember that movie where I think it was Jim Carrey? He couldn't lie. So not when I'm around Malcolm, I only know for 57 years, but around Pastor Hagee, I can't lie. So I have a confession to make, and I know it's sort of the wrong section of Christendom. So you know that Malcolm was trying to milk the audience for sympathy because he had to add an hour to his fast yesterday. He wanted to know what happened to it. I came from Los Angeles. I had 1 hour less. What are you going to do? And thank you, Sherry, for that introduction. Let me just say that I recently, with my wife, was able to get into Israel and to attend my oldest grandchild's wedding in Jerusalem, an out-of-body experience. And while there, I went for 4 days back to the Gulf states. This is a time they actually need more love, more reassurance because of the current prevailing political winds. But I can confirm to you that we have a situation where Bahrain embraced the IRA definition, but we can't get the University of Southern California to do the same. I can confirm to you that at 10 o'clock at night in Abu Dhabi, and I don't know anyone who'd want to go out voluntarily in the summertime when it's 103 degrees, but nonetheless, I can confirm to you that I could walk and did walk freely in Abu Dhabi, in Manama, throughout the Gulf with a kippah without looking over my shoulder. I cannot say the same for Los Angeles, where I live, or New York, where I'll go visit my 96-year-old mother tomorrow for the first time in nearly 20 months. Anti-Semitism is alive and well. You heard it from the best, from Malcolm. So knowing that I was coming after two of the most powerful speakers in our country, I decided to take a slightly different tack. And I guess we'll find out in a couple of months if I actually get invited back how I did. So for starters, you know, CUFI thinks of everything. Velvet Writings, Pastor, I think you need to give her maybe, you know, a few dollars extra. Amazing. When she spoke to me, she said, well, you know, this is 7 o'clock minyan this morning. And when I tried to explain to her that yesterday was Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, the saddest day in our calendar, and I was coming in from Los Angeles, she said, no worries, Rabbi, when you get to your room, I promise you there's going to be a kosher meal waiting for you. I said, yes, I really appreciate that, but you also have to make sure that it's not a meat meal. Jews, we have a lot, you know, just when you think you got us figured out, there's like another wrinkle, and there's another thing. Why? So you may know that the 9th day of Av is when we commemorate one disaster after another in the Jewish calendar. Most prominently, the destruction of Solomon's temple, and a few hundred years later, the destruction by the Romans of the Second Temple. What's not thought about or talked about very much, however, is that it wasn't the 9th day of Av when the temple actually burned to the ground. It was the 10th day of Av. Today is the 10th day of Av. And as a result, our sages told us that on the 10th, you don't have to fast, but no meat, and try to keep some of those rules that we do when we're still in a period of mourning. But we definitely scale it back in a very profound way. And the question that's asked, why don't we continue to fast and mourn and cry and lament today as well? Many rabbis have given their input and reaction. I would just say that herein lies an important strategy for all of us in confronting and dealing with the calamities, the threats, and the challenges before us today. We are told that the fire, Aish, was still burning at midday today on the 10th. Aish, the fire of destruction of Solomon's temple by the Babylonians, the Second Temple, the devastation with 19 years of exile ahead of us by the Romans, followed by destruction, devastation that pockmarked Jewish history and culminated in the Nazi Holocaust, the 6 million Jews, 1.5 million Jewish kids, our most beloved scholars, mass murdered. Tisha B'Av teaches us that yes, we mourn, we fast, we cry bitterly, we are bereft. But if you're still alive to be one of the people to remember the destruction, to mourn the destruction, you are alive with a purpose. You are there to rebuild. There is a time to cry, and there's a time not to cry. The 10th of Av is a day not to cry. I remember learning that lesson from the most unusual and unexpected quarter. God, I go back with Malcolm to the time I was 17 years old, which means he must have just been 19. But in 1972, I spent 4 weeks in the Soviet Union, and Yom Kippur was in Moscow. Like the foolish young man that I was under the understanding that I was going to save Soviet Jewry, to help those refuseniks. And what I found out very quickly on that Yom Kippur morning, when I watched the Soviet militia surrounding the Chorale Synagogue in Moscow, when I saw people who looked more like they lived in the 1930s than the 1970s, elderly Jews furtively trying to get into synagogue, I cried. I cried on the street. And then there was a tap on my shoulder from an amazing, really good-looking fellow named Gavriel Shapiro. Smile, looked more like an Aryan, really, than another Jew from Brooklyn. And I looked at him, I knew the name, and he had a minyan. For those of you who didn't attend this morning at 7 a.m., a minyan means 10 people, 10 men. He had a minyan of KGB surrounding him. I looked at him, we only had 4, and my knees were knocking. And he said, why are you crying? These guys, they're just doing their job. You've got your American passport, don't you? You're a proud Jew, aren't you? Are you breaking any laws? No. Then stop crying and get to work. That's what I heard. Sometimes nicer, sometimes less nicer. That's what I learned from 4 weeks with the KGB, or otherwise known, you're in good hands with Allstate. When it came that time, and Christians had it horribly, and the Muslims there suffered in Baku and elsewhere, that was my first lesson, that there's a time not to cry. More recently, hard to believe it's 20 years ago, just before 9/11, I was the spokesman for the Jewish groups at the so-called and ill-fated United Nations Conference, World Conference Against Racism, otherwise known as Durban. And things were so horrible there that the 30 or so Jewish leaders from around the world, we would escape to the Jewish Community Center a few blocks away from the debacle, and there, grown men were crying. And this time, it was up to this New York native to tell my colleagues, some of them senior, stop crying. Now is not the time to cry. Now's the time to act. Aish, fire. Moses in the burning bush. Pastor Hagee, you probably know better than me who said it first, but I think my favorite interpretation about the burning bush was, A, it was not hidden. It was at an intersection where people passed all the time. And B, it was always alit. It wasn't specially on fire for Moses. Any passerby could have stopped and seen the obvious miracle. And probably Moses passed by that spot more than once himself, but he wasn't ready yet for leadership. That burning bush was always burning, but no one stopped to notice, not even Moses, until he was ready to lead and had not even yet admitted it to himself, but God said, you stopped, you're ready to lead. There are two types of leaders. One whose source is from power, the power of the state, the power of politics. I guess we can add now the power of social media. We are witnessing and seeing and borne the brunt of the weaponizing of ideas, of words, of ideals by politicians. As far as I know, none of them stopped before the burning bush. None of them paused long enough to remove their shoes, to stand in awe of the Almighty, to reflect on the holy mission and accept it. In our day, and Malcolm and I are here, this one day a year we only can tell the truth, this includes too many Jews who have mistaken power for leadership, who have voluntarily and inexplicitly forsaken and forgotten Zion, who have forgotten the Jewish nation's task is not cancel culture, but counsel culture. They have forgotten that type of aish, of fire. Unfortunately, they have forgotten the fire of faith. The flame that can guide us to the future is never at the end of a lit Molotov cocktail in Portland, Oregon. But we would find it always on the tear-soaked pages of our Torah and our Talmud. Anti-Semitism, Malcolm gave it a start. We just can say one other thing about what's going on today, and that on top of all of these tsaros, it's an ancient Chinese word, which means problems, is the fact that the Hamas war has been exported to the streets of Europe and across North America. On top of everything else, we now have a level of violence against Jews in places like Montreal, unheard of in the past. Finally, in keeping with my promise to be honest today, for us Jews, there are two types of Christians. There's the Tisha B'Av Christian of Lamentations, and then there's the 10th of Av Christian, which I'll get to in a moment. Around the time that Rabbi Marvin Heyer, our founder and dean, and myself had the honor to be sitting in Jerusalem on that amazing day when, for some reason, they asked Pastor Hagee to be the 16th speaker out of 15. By the way, it didn't make a difference. He still stole the show. About that time, the following was unfolding in the Ukraine. Father Patrick Dubois is a Catholic priest, and he has committed himself over years now, over decades, to go to Eastern Europe and uncover the sites of the mass graves where the Jews of Eastern Europe, who were in Soviet territory, met their fate. They were never put in ghettos. They weren't sent to death camps. They were shot right in their communities. And because so many parts of the Ukraine are populated by religious Christians, and because he has a collar, he's been very successful in getting aging locals who were just primarily little kids back then to say, yes, I remember, yeah, the Jews, I'll take you out to the spot where they were executed. Amazing, holy work. Father Dubois had the following experience about the time that Pastor Hagee was speaking in Yerushalayim. There was one person, amazingly, who was quite elderly, a local Ukrainian, who had the guts to admit to the father that he participated in the mass shootings of his own neighbors when he was a young man, probably little more than a teenager. And like the others, he took them out to the spot where the people, where the Jewish people, where his Jewish neighbors were taken out and shot to death and buried in nameless mass graves. He was preparing to leave the following Sunday to go to the next location when this elderly man came to see him. And he said, Father, I've come because I want to confess and I want you to give me absolution. So Father Dubois said to himself, amazing, finally, one person who's coming to ask to be forgiven? And he said, okay, that's my job as a priest. What is it? He said, I remember now that the day that I went out to help the Germans to murder my Jewish neighbors was Sunday. It was the Sabbath. I came to you to ask for forgiveness and absolution for violating the Sabbath. There are Tisha B'Av Christians, and there are 10th of Av Christians. Yesterday, before we got on our planes, Malcolm and I, Bill, the rabbis, we sat on the ground in our synagogues to read what are called keynote in Hebrew. They're lamentations, without lamentations that are quite explicit, about times long forgotten and about the Shoah. Probably the word Zion, Sion, is in there at least 100 times, all over. When you think about the Jewish people who are now forsaking Zion, that itself is enough of a reason to sit on the ground and to mourn. But I want to read two quotes from two keynotes. I'll read them in English. I'm sure Pastor Hagee has invoked these lines before, but these are actually part of our prayers yesterday. Zion, Zion, Those who are tormented by your pain will be enthused by your beauty when the sun shines upon your wounds. Zion, they will bring gifts to appease your wrath, and those who have terrorized you will bow at your feet. Zion, adorn yourself with brocaded garments, and with courage and strength wear your glorious and precious clothing. Zion, forget your agony, cleanse yourself and prepare yourself. Put on precious garments and fragrant oils. Zion, your days of mourning have ended in joy and in glee. Your sins are over and done with, as are your two great catastrophes. Zion, a treasure for kings and nations shall you be. Gentle waters will yet flow from your fountain. Zion, hope for your redemption. You will be again called a crown of glory by the upright. Zion, blessing and life are with you. For the Lord of Jacob has ordered this forever, and they will yet proclaim this to your ears. Zion, a multitude of priests will serve you, and God himself will secure your commanders. Thank you, Commander Hagee, for everything you have done. God bless you, and God bless all the soldiers of CUFI. We love you all.